The dog moved before anyone in the shop even noticed her. 1 second, the German Shepherd was heeling tight against his handler's left leg, perfectly still, the way working dogs hold themselves when they're waiting on a command. The next second, he broke. Clean, deliberate, no hesitation, crossed 12 feet of scuffed linoleum, and sat down directly beside a young woman standing at the pawn counter with a small velvet pouch in her hands. Nobody told him to. His handler, a broad-shouldered man in a weathered field jacket, went rigid. In 6 years working with that dog, he had never once broken formation without a signal. The woman looked down at the shepherd. The shepherd looked up at her. Something passed between them that nobody else in the shop could name. Then the man in the field jacket stepped forward, reached across the glass counter, and picked up one of the medals she'd set out. He turned it over. Read the engraving on the back. Read it again. His face went completely still. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The woman met his eyes without blinking. "It's mine." The shop stayed quiet for 3 full seconds. Then everything changed. If this story already has you holding your breath, follow along, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The velvet pouch had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 11 days before Nora Voss finally picked it up. She'd walk past it every morning on her way to the coffee maker, pretended not to see it, made herself look at the water stain on the ceiling above the sink instead, or the stack of unopened mail she kept moving from one end of the counter to the other without ever dealing with. The pouch sat there the way debt sits, quiet, patient, absolutely certain it will be dealt with eventually. On the 12th morning, the coffee maker stopped working. That was the thing that broke her, not the final notice from the utility company. Not the $12 overdraft fee that had shown up on her banking app at 2 a.m. while she was still in scrubs, driving home from a double shift. Not even the fact that she'd eaten peanut butter crackers for dinner 3 nights in a row because the grocery run she kept planning kept getting pushed back by shifts that ran long and a body that needed sleep more than it needed food. The coffee maker. That was the thing. She stood in the kitchen of her studio apartment in Harlow City and looked at the dead appliance and felt something in her chest go very flat and very quiet. Then she picked up the velvet pouch, put it in her jacket pocket, and walked out to her car. Kepler's Pawn and Exchange was 8 blocks from her apartment complex, wedged between a closed-down tax preparation office and a laundromat that smelled like other people's problems. Nora had driven past it maybe 200 times and never once considered going inside. The idea of going inside had been, up until 11 days ago, the kind of thing she filed in the category of not yet. Not yet meant things weren't that bad. Not yet meant she still had room to maneuver. She didn't have room anymore. The bell above the door announced her arrival to nobody in particular. The man behind the counter, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a half-eaten sandwich beside the register, glanced up and went back to whatever he was writing. 2 other customers moved slowly through the aisles, neither of them paying attention to anything. Then she noticed the dog. He was near the back of the shop, sitting beside a man who was examining something in one of the display cases. A working dog, obviously. The harness, the posture, the absolute stillness of him gave it away immediately. Nora registered it the way she registered most things that didn't directly require her attention, filed it, moved on. She stepped up to the counter and set the velvet pouch down. The man behind the counter put down his pen and looked at what she pulled out. A service ribbon, 2 commendation medals, a unit citation, each one in its original case, the cases worn soft at the corners, the interiors still clean. He picked one up, turned it, set it down, picked up another. His expression didn't change, which she appreciated. She didn't need an expression. "These are military honors," he said. "Yes." "They're yours?" "Yes." He glanced at her. The scrubs, the jacket, the tired eyes, and nodded slowly like he was working something out. "I can do 300 for the lot. Maybe 350 if that unit citation's documented." $350. She had owed her landlord $412 since the 1st of the month. She'd already talked him into waiting until Friday. Today was Wednesday. $350 works, she said. She was reaching for her ID when she heard the dog move. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift in the air behind her. She turned and the German Shepherd was right there. Not aggressive, not uncertain, just present. sitting down beside her left leg with the calm authority of something that had made a decision and wasn't looking for input on it. Nora looked at him. He looked back. His dark eyes were steady in a way that made her throat tighten for reasons she couldn't immediately account for. Diesel. The voice came from the man at the display case. Low, controlled, carrying a particular kind of authority that didn't need volume to land. Heel. The dog didn't move. In her peripheral vision, she saw the man turn. Saw him clock the situation. His dog, the woman at the counter, the items laid out on the glass. Saw him cross the shop with deliberate steps, reach past her, and pick up one of the medals. He was tall, probably late 30s, the kind of lean that comes from years of carrying weight rather than lifting it for aesthetics. The field jacket had seen real use. His hands were steady as he turned the medal over, found the engraving on the reverse face, and read what was stamped there. He read it twice. She counted. Then he looked at her and asked where she'd gotten it. She told him it was hers. And the way he was looking at her, not like she was lying, but like something had just rearranged itself behind his eyes, made her stomach drop in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Your name is Nora Voss?" he said. She hadn't told him her name. "It's on the medal," he said, and his voice had gone quieter. "Staff Sergeant Nora Voss, 8th Medical Brigade." "That's right," she said. He set the medal down carefully, not like he was dismissing it, more like he was being deliberate about where he placed it. "I'm James Calloway," he said. "I did 3 tours with the 75th. We ran joint operations with your unit in Kandahar in 2016. Nora said nothing. The shop had gotten very quiet. "I knew your team," he said. "I heard what happened to you." Something in her face went still, the particular stillness of someone who has had a lot of practice not showing what's happening on the inside. "Then you know I'm not interested in talking about it," she said. "I know what they said you did," Calloway said. "I also know it wasn't true." She left the shop without selling the medals. She couldn't have explained afterward exactly why. The practical situation hadn't changed. She still owed her landlord $412. The coffee maker was still dead. The utility notice was still on the counter. None of that had moved, but something had shifted in a way she couldn't put language to, and walking out of Kepler's with the velvet pouch still in her jacket pocket felt less like a decision than like a reflex, like her body had made up its mind before her head caught up. She sat in her car for 6 minutes. She knew it was 6 minutes because she watched the clock on the dashboard, because she needed something to look at that wasn't the inside of her own thoughts. Then her phone buzzed. A text from the scheduling system at Harlow General, the hospital where she'd been working as a floor nurse for the past 2 years. Shift coverage needed tonight, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Overtime rate applies. She typed back yes before she finished reading it. She went home, slept for 4 hours, ate the last of the crackers, and drove to the hospital. Harlow General was a mid-sized regional medical center that operated the way most mid-sized regional medical centers operated, understaffed, overscheduled, running on a combination of institutional habit and individual stubbornness. The nursing staff held the place together in the way nursing staffs always do, quietly, without much acknowledgement, and with the particular brand of exhausted competence that develops when people have been doing difficult work for a long time without adequate resources. Nora had been there long enough to know the rhythms, long enough to know which attending physicians listened and which ones didn't, long enough to know that the night charge nurse, Deborah Falk, kept a spreadsheet of which beds were going to spike in acuity before the residents even noticed, and that if you wanted to get ahead of a bad night, you watched Deborah's spreadsheet, not the official census report. She clocked in at 6:52, changed into fresh scrubs, and picked up her patient assignments from the board. Her first hour was clean. 2 post-surgical, 1 observation, 2 straightforward medical. She moved through assessments with the automatic efficiency of someone who has done this enough times that her hands know the job, even when her mind is somewhere else. Her mind was, in fact, somewhere else. She was thinking about Kandahar, about a specific night in a specific forward operating base in 2016, and a specific set of orders that she had refused to carry out, and everything that had followed from that refusal. She hadn't let herself think about it in, she did the math, almost 14 months. She'd gotten good at keeping the door closed. James Calloway had put his hand on the door, and she could feel it now, straining against the frame. She was charting on the wall-mounted terminal outside room 4 when she heard raised voices from down the corridor. Not patient voices, staff voices. She looked up. Through the glass doors at the end of the hall, she could see the nursing station, and standing at the nursing station was a man she recognized immediately. Dr. Patrick Holt, the unit's senior attending. Holt was talking to someone she didn't recognize, such a woman in administrative clothing, carrying a tablet with the particular set of her shoulders that meant she wasn't there to negotiate. Nora went back to her charting. Not her business. 30 seconds later, Deborah Falk appeared at her elbow. "Patient in room 7, Deborah said, and her voice had a quality to it that made Nora look up. 43-year-old male, brought in by ambulance 20 minutes ago. Abdominal pain, elevated BP. The resident on call documented it as possible kidney stone and ordered observation." "Okay," Nora said. "I don't think it's a kidney stone," Deborah said. Nora was already moving. The patient in room 7 was a stocky man named Dave, who had the skin color of old wax and the expression of someone trying very hard to appear less frightened than he was. His wife sat in the corner chair doing the same. The monitor showed his pressure at 168 over 104 and his heart rate at 97. "Hey," Nora said, and pulled up the rolling stool beside the bed, not standing over him, eye level. "Tell me about the pain." "It's bad," Dave said. "Like, really bad. Started in my back, but now it's—" He shifted, and she could see him working to breathe through it. "It's in my stomach now, and my chest a little." She had his wrist in her hand before she finished the thought, feeling the pulse, noting the quality. She looked at his abdomen, and then looked again, and something cold and focused dropped into place behind her eyes. "Has anyone done an abdominal exam since you came in?" she asked. "The young doctor," his wife said. She pressed on his stomach. "Did she do an ultrasound?" "She said they'd wait and see." Nora stood. "I'll be right back," she told Dave. And the steadiness of her voice was a deliberate thing, calibrated. She walked out and straight to the resident who was at the nursing station writing notes. The resident's name was Dr. Yoon, and she was 3 months into her first year, which Nora noted without judgment. "Room 7, Nora said. "His pain has migrated. He's got visible abdominal asymmetry, and the pressure hasn't responded to the positioning changes. I need you to look at him again." Yoon looked up. "I documented him as probable renal colic. He's scheduled for observation." "I know what he's scheduled for," Nora said, keeping her voice very even. "I'm asking you to look at him again." The presentation has changed in the last 20 minutes. Something in Nora's tone, not the words exactly, but the weight behind them, made Yoon close her notebook. They went back to room 7 together. Nora watched while Yoon did the exam, and she watched the moment Yoon felt what was there. The subtle pulsatile quality, the distension that hadn't been visible on admission. Because Yoon's face changed. "Get Dr. Holt," Yoon said, and her voice had changed too. "Now, and get vascular surgery on the phone." Nora was already at the door. The next hour had this quality of controlled emergency, the kind that looks, from the outside, like a well-rehearsed sequence, but is actually 100 individual judgments made in real time by people who are moving faster than they're thinking. The vascular surgery attending arrived 9 minutes after the page. The patient was in the OR 18 minutes after that. Abdominal aortic aneurysm, partially dissected. If it had gone another few hours as a suspected kidney stone, it wouldn't have mattered what interventions they tried. Nora was back at her station charting when Dr. Holt found her. He was a man in his late 50s who had been in medicine long enough to be past the point of theatrical gratitude. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking. "Good catch," he said finally. "Deborah flagged it," Nora said. "I just went to look." Holt nodded slowly, in the way of someone filing information. "You've got good instincts," he said. "I've had good training," she said, and left it there. He left. She finished her charting. She didn't see the administrative woman again until 4 a.m., when the administrator, whose name badge read Lynette Marsh, Director of Nursing Operations, appeared at the nursing station and asked to speak with her privately. They went to the small consultation room off the main corridor. Marsh had the tablet, and she had the look of someone who had arrived at a predetermined conclusion and was now walking through the formality of the conversation. "We've been reviewing staffing and credentialing records," Marsh said, "specifically for agency and contract nurses brought on in the last 18 months. "I'm not agency," Nora said. "I'm direct hire." "Your paperwork indicates that," Marsh said. "However, we've found some inconsistencies." The word inconsistencies sat in the air between them. Nora kept her face neutral. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Marsh looked at the tablet. "Your prior employment history has some gaps. The references you listed, one of them is no longer at the institution you named, and we've had difficulty verifying your previous supervisory relationship at—" She named a place. It was a real place. Nora had worked there. She had also, at the time of applying to Harlow General, left off approximately 8 years of prior history, because explaining 8 years of military service as a combat medic, followed by a dishonorable discharge that she had never accepted and could not openly contest, was not something she had known how to do. So she'd left it out. She'd built the nursing career on what remained. "The reference is on sabbatical," Nora said. "Dr. Erling, she's at a research program in Minnesota. I can get you contact information." "We've also been looking at your nursing license," Marsh said. "There's a flag." "There's not," Nora said. "The state board shows a notation." "I know what the notation says," Nora said. "I also know that notation is under administrative review because it was filed incorrectly. I have documentation. I can provide it tomorrow." Marsh looked at her steadily. "I'm sure you understand that the hospital has to take these things seriously." "I do understand that," Nora said. "What I'm asking is whether you're telling me there's an open question or whether you're telling me you've already made a decision." A small silence. "We're placing you on administrative leave," Marsh said, "pending review." "Starting when?" "End of this shift." Nora breathed in through her nose. Let it out. "I have 4 patients who are mid-shift in their care plan," she said. "They'll need proper handoff." "We'll handle handoffs," Marsh said. "I'd like to do them myself." "We'll handle it," Marsh said again, and the finality in it was not unkind exactly, but it was absolute. She did her handoffs anyway. She was not aggressive about it. She didn't push back on Marsh directly. She went to each room, spoke to each patient, made sure the incoming nurse had everything she needed. It took 41 minutes. Nobody stopped her, possibly because nobody wanted to have the conversation it would have required. At 6:03 a.m., she clocked out. She sat in the parking garage on the 3rd level and felt the specific heaviness of a situation that is bad and getting worse. The license flag. She knew where that had come from. She'd suspected it for months. A complaint filed through the state board. Origin anonymous. Timing suspicious. It had coincided, not coincidentally, with her attempt 7 months ago to request access to her military discharge records through a veterans advocacy office. She'd thought she'd been careful. She'd used a separate email. She'd gone through the advocacy office rather than filing directly. But someone had noticed, or been notified, and the flag had appeared 11 days later. She'd been fighting the flag through proper channels since then. It was going badly. She pulled out her phone and looked at the text thread she'd started with James Calloway at 11 p.m., after her 3rd hour at the hospital, when she'd decided that refusing to engage was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. "I want to know what you know," she'd written. "Call me when your shift ends," he'd written back. She called him now. He answered on the 2nd ring. "You're off?" he said. "I'm suspended," she said. "Administrative leave, pending review of a flag that shouldn't exist." A pause. "When did the flag appear?" 7 months ago. "After you tried to access your records." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. She heard him exhale. "Nora, I need you to listen to me carefully," he said. "What I found in the last 10 hours is worse than I expected. The pattern of what happened to you. It's not isolated. I've found at least 6 other names. Personnel from different units, different deployments, all of whom raised questions about decisions made by the same command structure. All of whom were subsequently," he paused, "removed. From service. From records. Some of them have been fighting the same kind of administrative dead ends you're hitting." She was quiet. "The name I keep finding," Calloway said, and his voice had gone very careful, "is General Marcus Doyle." The parking garage around her was gray and concrete and very still. General Marcus Doyle. She knew that name. She knew it the way you know the name of the thing that ended your life as you understood it. "He's been promoted," she said. It wasn't a question either. "He's up for a second star," Calloway said. "Confirmation hearing is in 6 weeks." 6 weeks. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. They were steady because she'd made them be steady for a long time. But something was moving behind her sternum. Something old and compressed and very, very tired of being compressed. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "I need to know exactly what happened on that operation," Calloway said. "Everything. The order, the refusal, the aftermath. And I need it documented in your words, not filtered through anyone else." "I tried to document it at the time," she said. "The paperwork went nowhere." "The paperwork went somewhere," he said. "It went to people who made it disappear. But it existed, which means traces of it exist. I know where to look. I just need the core facts from you to know what I'm looking for." Outside the parking garage, the sky was going pale in that particular way it goes just before the sun actually appears. Not light, exactly, more like the memory of light, arriving before the thing itself. "All right," she said. "Can you come to me now?" She thought about the velvet pouch in her jacket pocket. The medals she'd almost sold for $350 to pay rent. She thought about Dave in room 7, whose heart was still beating because Deborah Falk had noticed something on a spreadsheet and Nora had known what to do with the information. She thought about 8 years of her life. "Give me your address," she said. She was already starting the car when her phone buzzed with an incoming message. Not from Calloway, from an unknown number. No name. Just a 10-digit number she didn't recognize. The message was 4 words. "Stop now. Last warning." She read it twice. Then she put the car in drive. The unknown number was still on her screen when she pulled out of the parking garage. She didn't block it. She screenshot it, sent the screenshot to her own email, and then put the phone face down on the passenger seat and kept driving. Stop now. Last warning. Last implied there had been others. There had been others. Not texts, but the accumulating weight of small discouragements that she'd been rationalizing for months. The license flag, which had appeared with suspicious timing. The advocacy office contact who had called her back in February and told her in an apologetic voice that carried something underneath it, that they wouldn't be able to assist with her case after all. The certified letter from the VA that had arrived in March, informing her that her appeal for record correction had been denied at the administrative level with no stated reason. Just denied, stamped in red like a period at the end of a sentence they didn't want her to finish. She'd been telling herself those things were bureaucratic, the normal friction of an overloaded system. She'd known, on some level, that wasn't what they were. The text just made it explicit. Calloway lived 22 minutes from the hospital, in a neighborhood that had the particular character of places where people choose to be close to things without being inside them. Near the city, near the highway, near enough to leave quickly if they needed to. His house was a single story with a chain-link fence and a pickup truck in the driveway and a porch light that was still on at 6:30 in the morning, which she took as intentional. She knocked. He opened the door before the second knock, already holding 2 mugs, and handed her one without asking how she took it. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. Diesel was on a mat near the kitchen doorway, watching her with the same dark, settled attention he'd had in the pawn shop. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them moved. "He's going to do that for a while," Calloway said. "He doesn't meet a lot of people he decides to pay attention to." "What does that mean?" she asked. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Come in." The living room had the functional quality of a space used by someone who wasn't home much and didn't have strong feelings about aesthetics. A couch, a table that had been cleared to make room for a laptop and several accordion folders, a whiteboard on the wall with names and dates written in small, precise handwriting. She looked at the whiteboard, and her own name was on it, near the top, with 3 dates beside it. "You started this before today," she said. "I started it 3 months ago," he said. "After I ran into someone who mentioned your name." She looked at him. "Who?" "Former sergeant named Walt Pritchard. He was in your unit for about 8 months before he was transferred. He reached out to me through a mutual contact. He'd been trying to find other people who served under that particular command structure and ended up—" He stopped. He used the word discarded. She knew Walt Pritchard. She hadn't thought about him in 2 years. How is he? She asked. Better than he was, Calloway said, which was not exactly an answer but contained one inside it. He's the one who gave me your name, not because he knew what happened to you specifically, but because he knew the time frame and he knew the unit, and he said if anyone had seen what was really going on, it would have been the senior medic. She sat down on the couch, both hands around the mug. The coffee was strong and slightly overbrewed and exactly what she needed. Tell me about Doyle, she said. Calloway turned to the whiteboard. Marcus Doyle. He was a colonel when you served under him, a sole commanding officer of your operational theater from 2015 to 2018. He made brigadier general 18 months after you were discharged. He's currently a 1-star with Joint Chiefs adjacent responsibilities, which is a way of saying he's in rooms where decisions get made without showing up on the official record of who was in the room. He's protected, she said. He's connected, Calloway said. There's a difference, but the practical effect is similar. He turned back. The promotion to 2 stars. If it goes through, he moves into a position where the oversight structure changes significantly. He'd be able to shape things more directly. Including what happens to people who filed appeals, she said. Including that. He sat in the chair across from her. Nora, how much of what happened in 2016 do you have documented? She thought about it honestly, which meant she sat with it for a moment before answering. I kept a personal log during deployment. I wrote down the order, the time it was given, my refusal, the reasons I gave. I wrote down what happened 40 minutes later. I tried to file a formal account through the proper channels. I have copies of what I submitted. Where are those copies? Storage unit, not local. She'd kept them there deliberately, not at her apartment, which could be searched under any number of pretexts. A storage unit 30 miles away, paid in cash, in her mother's maiden name. She'd done that instinctively, without fully articulating to herself why. Calloway looked at her steadily. You planned for the possibility that someone would want to get to them. I planned for the possibility that I wasn't being paranoid, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, more like the thing that comes after surprise, when you've confirmed something you half expected. I need to see them, he said. Not copies. I need to photograph the originals and get them to a secure location that I control, because if this goes where I think it's going, the chain of custody on that documentation is going to matter. What do you mean? Where you think it's going? He leaned forward. I have a contact at the Inspector General's office. Former colleague, someone I trust. I've been feeding him what I've been finding over the past 3 months. Not your case specifically, because I didn't have enough on your case specifically, but the broader pattern. 7 names now, including you. 7 people whose military careers ended under circumstances that share the same fingerprints. He paused. He called me last night, 2 hours before I walked into that pawn shop. He said the IG office has opened a preliminary inquiry. The room was very quiet. Preliminary means it can be closed, she said. Yes. How solid does it need to be before it can't be closed? Solid enough that closing it becomes a bigger problem than opening it, Calloway said. That's where the documentation comes in. Right now, we have a pattern and we have testimony from people who've been labeled as disgruntled former personnel. We need something harder, something that puts Doyle in direct contact with the decisions, not just the outcomes. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the whiteboard. 6 names besides hers, written in small, careful letters with dates and unit designations beside each one. She didn't know all of them, but she knew some. She knew what they'd been before everything that came after. There's something else, she said. Calloway waited. The night of the operation, the one where I refused the route order, there was a comms log. She set her mug down on the table. Standard protocol. All operational communications were logged to a secure server. The order would have been on that log. My response would have been on that log. Everything that happened over the next 40 minutes would have been on that log. That log would have been archived, Calloway said. Unless it was pulled, she said, which is what I think happened. But pulling a comms log creates a gap, and gaps in archived records have to be accounted for. She looked at him. If someone covered for Doyle by pulling that log, there's a record of the pull request. There has to be. Those systems require authorization trails. Calloway was very still. You know this because I spent 8 years in a system that ran on documentation, she said. You can make things disappear, but the request to make them disappear leaves a mark. If someone at the IG level has the access and the standing to request that authorization trail, they could find who pulled it, Calloway finished. And why, she said, and who authorized the why? She watched him process that. He turned back to the whiteboard and wrote something, a note, an arrow, a connection she couldn't fully read from where she was sitting. Diesel shifted on his mat and resettled, chin to pause. Okay, Calloway said, and the quality of his voice had changed, sharpened, like something had clicked into focus. I need to make a call. She drove to the storage unit alone. Calloway had offered to come. She'd said no, and he hadn't pushed it, which she appreciated. Some things she needed to handle herself, not because of pride exactly, but because she'd been the one who put those documents there, in that place, with that particular care. And going to retrieve them felt like something she needed to be alone for. The storage facility was 32 miles north of Harlow City, off a highway that moved through stretches of flat farmland. She drove with the radio off, which she almost never did. She usually needed noise to keep the thoughts from stacking. But this morning, the quiet felt necessary, like preparation. She thought about the night in question, the way operations work when they're working right, and the way they feel when something is wrong, a specific kind of wrongness, not the ordinary tension of dangerous work, but a different quality, like a note struck slightly flat. She'd felt it before Doyle's order came through. The route they'd been assigned was through a valley that, on every piece of intelligence she'd seen in the prior 72 hours, was flagged as contested. The flag wasn't categorical. Flags rarely were. But the pattern of the flags, the frequency, the specific types of movement reports, had a shape she recognized. She'd said so. To her immediate superior, who had said he'd pass it up. And then the order had come down anyway. And she'd looked at it on the screen, and she'd known. She'd sent her team another direction. She'd documented the deviation immediately, time-stamped, reason-coded, sent through the official channel. She'd known even then that she was handing someone a reason to come after her. She'd made the calculation that 10 lives were worth the cost. She hadn't fully known what the cost would be. The storage unit was in the middle row, third from the end. She unlocked it with the key she kept on a ring separate from her other keys, behind the lining of a jacket pocket. Inside, in a plastic bin behind a box of her mother's dishes that she'd been meaning to deal with for 3 years, was a manila envelope with her name written on the outside in her own handwriting. She stood in the storage unit and opened the envelope and looked at what was inside. The log. The copies of the formal account she'd filed. 3 photographs taken immediately after the ambush, which she'd taken herself on a personal device before anyone could stop her. A printed email thread between her and her CO that she'd managed to forward to a personal account before her military email access was terminated. She held the photographs for a moment. She hadn't looked at them in over a year. Then she put everything back in the envelope, put the envelope in the inside pocket of her jacket, locked the storage unit, and drove back to Harlow City. She was 40 minutes from Calloway's house when her phone rang. Not a text this time. A call from a different unknown number. She let it ring through to voicemail. When the notification appeared, she waited until she was stopped at a light and played it on speaker. A man's voice. Measured, unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. Miss Voss, I think we should have a conversation before this goes any further. I'm reaching out in good faith. You have my number now. I'd encourage you to use it. No name, no reference to anything specific. She didn't recognize the voice. She played it again and then again. The third time, she was listening less to the words than to the quality of the voice. The specific kind of calm that exists in people who are not accustomed to being denied what they want and who believe that the appropriate response to a problem is to personally contact the problem and offer it a conversation. She played the recording into her phone's voice memo app and saved it with the timestamp. Then she called Calloway. Someone just called me, she said when he picked up. Male voice, no name, no specifics, knew who I was, said he was reaching out in good faith. How did they get your number? Same way they found out I tried to access my records, she said. They have access to things they should not have access to. She heard him exhale. Where are you? About 35 minutes out. I got the documentation. Good. Nora. A pause. My contact at the IG called back. They've found the authorization trail. She gripped the wheel. The comms log pull. Yes. It was requested 18 days after the operation. The request was routed through a staff officer attached to Doyle's command, but the authorization came from higher. They're still tracing how far up it goes, but he stopped. The request listed your name specifically. It flagged your comms log and 2 others from that operational window, which meant someone had known exactly what they were looking for, which meant they'd known what the log contained, which meant Doyle, or someone acting for Doyle, had understood what she'd documented and had moved quickly to remove it. They didn't remove it completely, she said. No, Calloway said. They couldn't. Pulling the surface-level archive doesn't touch the backup system. The backup is managed by a completely separate department, and it runs on a delay. What they pulled was the accessible record. The backup retained a copy. She was quiet for a moment. The highway stretched ahead of her, flat and gray in the morning light. They thought they'd gotten everything, she said. They thought they'd gotten everything, he confirmed. She arrived to find a second car in Calloway's driveway. A dark gray sedan, nondescript, with government plates she recognized the format of without being able to place the specific agency. Her stomach tightened. She sat in her car for a moment, then she got out. The man inside was introduced to her as Warren, and he offered no last name, and his badge, when he showed it briefly, indicated an office of the Inspector General. He was 50 or so, compact, with the permanently tired expression of someone who has been following paper trails for decades and has made a kind of peace with the fact that the trails rarely end cleanly. I have some questions for you, Warren said. He had a recorder on the table in front of him. Standard documentation process. You're not required to answer anything. I want to be clear about that. But anything you do share becomes part of the formal record. I understand, Nora said. She sat down and put the manila envelope on the table. Warren looked at it. Is that contemporary documentation, she said. Time-stamped. Personal log from the period in question, copies of formal reports I submitted at the time, and 3 photographs taken immediately post-incident. She paused. I also have a voicemail received approximately 40 minutes ago from an unknown mail caller who identified himself as reaching out in good faith and invited me to call him back before this went any further. I have that recording on my phone. Warren looked at her for a moment in the way of someone recalibrating. Then he reached over and clicked on the recorder. Let's start from the beginning, he said. She talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. She talked about the route order and the intelligence reports she'd reviewed and the specific flags that had formed the pattern she'd recognized. She talked about reporting her concerns and the order coming down anyway and the decision she'd made. She talked about what happened 40 minutes later, the firefight, the casualties on the enemy side, the 10 soldiers who had come back because they'd gone a different way. She talked about what happened to her afterward, the formal accusation of insubordination, the proceeding that had lasted 4 days and had been conducted in a way she had not, at the time, fully understood was not standard. The discharge, the record that had been constructed to explain the discharge. She talked about the 7 months of attempts to access her records, and the flag on her nursing license, and the certified letter from the VA, and the text message that morning and the phone call 40 minutes ago. She laid the photographs on the table. Warren looked at them for a long time without speaking. She laid the email thread on the table. He looked at that too. At 2 hours and 14 minutes, she stopped talking. Not because she was finished, there was more, but because she needed water and her voice was going and she'd reached a natural resting point in the account. Warren turned off the recorder. He didn't say anything immediately. He was looking at the table, at the photographs, at the emails, at the envelope that had been sitting in a storage unit for 2 years, waiting. The comms log backup, he said finally, and his voice was careful. Do you have reason to believe it contains the specific transmission records from that night? Yes, she said. Can I ask how you know that? Because I sent the transmission, she said. I know what I sent. I know when I sent it. I know which channel it went on, If the backup retained the logs from that window, my transmission is in there. Time-stamped. Time-stamped, she said, with my identification code, documenting my refusal, the stated reason, and the alternative route coordinates. Warren looked at Calloway, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table for the past hour. If we can pull that log, Warren said slowly, we have a direct chain, the order, the refusal, the outcome, and then the request to pull the surface archive 18 days later. Someone knew what it showed, Nora said. Someone knew, and they tried to close the door. They didn't close it all the way, Warren said. No, she said. They didn't. The room was quiet except for the sound of Diesel shifting on his mat and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. Morning had fully arrived now. The light through the windows was clean and direct, no longer that ambiguous pre-dawn gray. Warren started to say something else, and then Calloway's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his expression changed, just slightly, just enough that Nora noticed because she'd learned over the past several hours to read him. He stood up and took the call in the hallway, which meant it was something he didn't want Warren to hear, which meant it was something she needed to find out quickly. She watched the doorway. He was on the call for 4 minutes. When he came back, he stood in the doorway instead of sitting. That was Walt Pritchard, he said. She waited. He was just contacted, Calloway said. Same thing? Unknown number, male voice, offering a conversation, but Pritchard didn't let it go to voicemail. He answered. He looked at her directly. The man who called didn't use his name, but he knew specific details about Pritchard's case that were never made public, things that should only be accessible to someone inside the system. Warren had gone very still. Pritchard asked who he was talking to, Calloway said. And, Nora said, he said he couldn't hear the name clearly. The call dropped. Calloway paused. But before it dropped, the man said one thing that Walt wrote down immediately and read to me just now. The room was waiting. He said, "This is bigger than you understand, and I'm trying to protect people who have no idea what's coming." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. Nora could feel it in her chest, not fear exactly, but the specific weight of something that has just become larger and more complicated than you thought it was. Warren stood up. "I need to make some calls," he said, and his voice had completely changed. The tired, methodical quality was gone, replaced by something more alert and more urgent. "I need the two of you to stay here, and I need you to not contact anyone until I get back to you." "How long?" Calloway asked. Warren was already putting on his jacket. "However long it takes," he said. "Don't go home," he added, looking at Nora. "Either of you. And don't answer numbers you don't recognize." He picked up his recorder and his notes and the photograph she'd given him, and he walked out. She listened to his car start and pull away. She sat in the silence for a moment, and then she said, "Someone inside is trying to warn the people Doyle hasn't gotten to yet." "That's what it sounds like," Calloway said. "Which means someone inside knows what Doyle is planning," she said. "Which means this isn't just about the past." Calloway said nothing, which was itself an answer. Diesel stood up from his mat, crossed the room, and sat down beside Nora's chair. She looked at him. He didn't look away. She put her hand on his head, not because she'd decided to, but because her hand moved there on its own, and he was very still under it, and the steadiness of him was something she hadn't expected to need as much as she did. Outside, a car turned slowly down the street. It was not Warren coming back. It stopped in front of the house and sat there, engine idling, for 45 seconds. Neither of them spoke. Calloway had moved to the window, not directly in front of it, to the side, the way someone moves when they want to look without being visible. Nora stayed where she was, her hand on Diesel's head, watching Calloway's face. His face told her what she needed to know before the car started moving again. "It circled," he said. "I know," she said. "They know where I live," he said, and there was nothing in his voice except the flat acknowledgement of a fact. "Yes," she said, "they know where you live." And the car that had circled was already gone, but what it left behind it was the clear and certain knowledge that the conversation she'd been having for the past 3 hours was not, and had never been, as private as anyone in that room had believed. Calloway moved first. He didn't say anything dramatic about it. He just crossed to the hallway closet, pulled out a go bag that had clearly been packed for a while, and set it by the front door. Then he went to the kitchen, opened a cabinet above the refrigerator, and retrieved a second phone in a waterproof case. He powered it on, checked the screen, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "We need to move," he said. Nora was already standing. "Where?" "Somewhere they don't have the address for." He looked at Diesel, who was on his feet and oriented toward the door with the calm readiness of an animal that understands the difference between a regular departure and a necessary one. "There's a place 40 minutes east, former colleague's property. He's in Germany until October. I have a key." "You trust him?" "More than I trust the situation we're currently in," Calloway said, which was not a complete answer but was probably the honest one. She picked up her jacket, felt the weight of the envelope in the interior pocket, and followed him out. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat with Diesel in the back and watched the mirrors the way she'd learned to watch them a long time ago. Not anxiously, not constantly, but with the peripheral attention of someone who has been trained to notice things in her field of vision without making the noticing obvious. Nothing followed them out of the neighborhood. Nothing followed them onto the highway. By the time they'd been driving 15 minutes, the specific tension in her shoulders had dropped from acute to merely present, which was where she was going to have to live for a while. "Tell me about Doyle's promotion timeline," she said. Calloway kept his eyes on the road. "Confirmation hearing is before the Senate Armed Services Committee, scheduled for 6 weeks out, which is tight. There's usually a longer lead time, but there was a vacancy at the 2-star level that opened unexpectedly, and Doyle is positioned as the immediate fill." He shifted lanes. If the hearing goes forward and he's confirmed, his new role comes with significantly expanded access to personnel records, IG communications, and internal investigation files. "He'd be able to see what Warren is doing," she said. "He'd be able to do more than see it," Calloway said. At the 2-star level with Joint Chiefs adjacency, he'd have standing to request that certain inquiries be redirected or consolidated under offices he influences. It's not a direct power to shut down an IG investigation, but it's proximity to people who can. 6 weeks, she said. It wasn't quite enough, and they both knew it. The IG process can move fast when there's political pressure to move fast, Calloway said. Warren knows this. That's why he left the way he did. She looked out the window at the flat-moving landscape. The person who called Pritchard, she said. Someone inside is scared of what Doyle is going to do with that expanded access. That's my read. Which means there are people in Doyle's immediate orbit who know what he's done and are looking for a way off the ship before it goes down. She paused. That's useful. It's useful if they'll talk, Calloway said. People in that position have a long history of deciding the risk is too high and going quiet. She understood that. She'd watched it happen from the inside. They drove the rest of the way without talking much, which suited her. She needed to think, and thinking, for her, was not a verbal process. It was something that happened in the space behind language, a kind of sorting, a weighing of what was solid against what was uncertain, a methodical accounting that had served her well in the field and was the thing she relied on now when everything else felt compromised. What was solid? The documentation in the envelope in her pocket, the voicemail on her phone, the comms log backup that Warren had indicated was recoverable, the pattern of 7 names across different units and deployments. What was uncertain? Whether Warren had the institutional standing to move fast enough. Whether whoever had called Pritchard would commit to anything. Whether the people watching Calloway's house were operating under direct instruction or running on freelance initiative, which made a difference to how much time she had. What she knew and nobody else did. There was something she hadn't told Warren yet. She hadn't withheld it deliberately, not exactly. The session had been long and she'd covered the primary facts and Warren had left quickly and the moment hadn't come. But there was a specific piece of information she'd been sitting on for 2 years because she hadn't known what to do with it, because it was the kind of thing that could either be extremely significant or be used against her, depending on who received it and how. She was going to have to make a decision about it soon. But the property was a working farm that wasn't working anymore. The fields had gone to pasture and the barn needed paint, but the house was solid and the water ran and the heat worked, and there was a landline that was not registered to either of them. Calloway unlocked the door with a key from his bag, did a walkthrough that she recognized as a habit from people who've lived in places where walking through a space before settling into it is not paranoia, but sense, and then came back to the kitchen. She'd put the envelope on the table. "There's something else," she said. He sat down. He didn't rush her. "The night of the operation," she said, "after the ambush was over and we'd accounted for everyone and I knew we were coming back intact, I found something in the communications that came across the General Command channel." She looked at the table. An encrypted message. It wasn't addressed to my unit, and under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have had access to it. But the encryption on that message used a protocol that was 3 versions out of date. Military comms upgrade schedules run on different timelines for different operational levels, and whoever sent it was using a channel they thought was more secure than it was. She paused. "I read it." Calloway was very still. "It wasn't a full message," she said. "I caught the tail end before the channel shifted, but what I read indicated that the order to take the compromised route had not originated with Doyle." Silence. "Doyle issued the order," she said carefully. "He was the commanding officer. The order came through his channel, under his authorization, but the message I intercepted suggested he was acting on instruction from someone above him, someone who had a specific interest in that route being used at that time." "What kind of interest?" Calloway asked, and his voice had gone very quiet. "I don't know," she said. "The message was fragmented, but the phrasing, the specific language, implied that the selection of that route wasn't tactical. It was deliberate, and the reason it was deliberate had nothing to do with military objectives." Calloway looked at the envelope on the table. "Is any of this in your documentation?" "I wrote it in the personal log," she said, "in a way that I hoped was unambiguous to someone reading it, but not immediately obvious to someone looking for reasons to discredit me." She met his eyes. "Because I knew what it looked like. A sergeant claiming she intercepted a message that proved the chain of command above her was operating outside of military authority. That's the kind of claim that ends careers. Mine was already ending. I didn't want to hand anyone more ammunition." "But you wrote it down." "I wrote it down," she said, "because it was true. And because I needed to have told someone, even if that someone was only going to be me, reading my own notes in a storage unit in 2 years. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the fields, and Diesel, who had settled near the back door, lifted his head and then put it back down. "If what you read is accurate," Calloway said slowly, "then Doyle isn't the ceiling of this." "No," she said, "he isn't. Which is why someone in his orbit is trying to get people to stop pulling threads. Because the thread doesn't stop at Doyle," she said, "and whoever is above Doyle doesn't want the thread pulled at all." She watched Calloway absorb this. She watched him do the same thing she'd been doing in the car, the invisible accounting, the sorting of solid against uncertain. "I need to tell Warren," he said finally. "Yes." "This changes the scope of what he's working with." "Yes," she said again. He reached for the secondary phone. She watched him dial and wait and heard the call connect. "It's me," Calloway said. "I need you to call me back on this number. We have a complication." He paused. Not a small one. He ended the call and set the phone on the table between them. They waited. Warren called back in 11 minutes. Calloway put him on speaker, and Nora told him what she'd told Calloway. She was precise about it. Dates, channel designations, the specific fragment of message content she'd retained. She didn't speculate. She stated what she'd seen and what she'd understood it to mean, and then she stopped. Warren didn't speak immediately. "You've held this for 2 years," he said. "Yes." "Why now?" "Because 6 weeks ago I didn't have anyone with IG access listening," she said, "and because someone told me to stop this morning, and I've spent 2 years doing what I was told, and I don't have anything left to lose." Another silence. She could hear something in the background of Warren's call. Not traffic, something more interior. Other voices, low, institutional. "Are you somewhere secure?" Warren asked. "Secure enough," Calloway said. "I need you to stay there." Warren's voice had taken on the quality she'd noticed when he'd stood up to leave the house. The tired, methodical layer was completely gone now. What was underneath was sharp and focused. What you've just described changes the category of this investigation. I need to make calls that I cannot make from an unsecured line, which means I need approximately 2 hours. We'll be here, Calloway said. One more thing, Warren said, and something in the phrasing made Nora's attention sharpen. The voicemail you received this morning, the one from the unknown number. Yes, she said. I had a colleague run a preliminary trace on the origin point. It's not complete yet, but the cell tower data puts the call originating from within a 3-block radius of a specific federal building in this city. She felt the cold drop in her chest. Which building? Warren named it. It was the Department of Defense Regional Coordination Office. The call hadn't come from someone outside the system trying to reach in. It had come from inside, from someone who was already there. She sat with that for a moment after Warren ended the call. Let it settle into its proper weight. They're not just watching, she said. No, Calloway said. Someone inside DOD knew about the IG preliminary inquiry, she said. Fast enough to call me the same morning it escalated. Which means there's a leak inside the IG process, Calloway said. Or there's someone inside DOD with access to IG communications at the preliminary stage. Either of those possibilities was bad. The second one was worse. She stood up and went to the window and looked out at the fields, which were brown and flat and completely indifferent to everything happening inside the house. She needed 30 seconds of looking at something that didn't require a response from her. The confirmation hearing, she said. If Doyle gets confirmed, he doesn't just get access to IG files. He gets into a position where whoever is above him gets a buffer. A 2-star with Joint Chiefs adjacency who owes his promotion to protection. That's a very useful thing to have. It's how these structures maintain themselves, Calloway said. Not through secrecy alone, through positioning. Then we can't let the hearing happen, she said. Warren's working on that. Warren is one person in an office that apparently has a leak, she said. She turned from the window. Who else has he told about the inquiry? Calloway paused. I don't know. That's a problem. Yes, he said. It is. Shush. They heard back from Warren at 2:40 in the afternoon, and what he had to say required Nora to sit down. The comms log backup had been formally accessed by a 2-person team from the IG's technical division. The records from the operational window were present and intact. Her transmission, time-stamped, identification-coded, documenting her refusal and the stated reason, was in the archive exactly as she'd described. So was the original route order, issued through Doyle's channel, and the comms traffic in the 40 minutes that followed. The complete picture. And alongside her transmission, the technical team had found 2 others from personnel in adjacent units who had flagged the same route through separate channels on the same evening. Flags that had never been formally acknowledged. Flags that had been sent to the command level and had, based on the archive, generated no logged response whatsoever. 3 separate warnings. Same route. Same night. All ignored. They have the archive, she said. They have the archive, Warren confirmed. Authenticated and in custody of the technical division. That record cannot be touched now. It's in the formal IG file. Something unknotted in her chest. Something she hadn't realized was still knotted. But Warren wasn't done. The authorization trail for the original pull request, the one that removed the surface-level archive 18 days after the operation, we have the complete chain now. He paused. The request was initiated by a staff officer attached to Doyle's command, as we knew. It was authorized by a civilian official in the DOD policy office. A civilian, Calloway said. A political appointee, Warren said. Someone who does not typically have standing to authorize the modification of operational communications records. Someone who would have needed to be asked by someone with sufficient influence to make that request seem legitimate. Do you have a name? Nora asked. Warren gave a name. She didn't recognize it. Calloway apparently did because his jaw tightened and he looked at the wall. You know him, she said. I know of him, Calloway said. He's been in DOD policy infrastructure for 15 years, multiple administrations, the kind of position that persists across changes at the top. And he authorized the pull, she said. He authorized the pull, Warren confirmed, which gives us the link. Doyle to the civilian appointee, the appointee to the erasure of the operational record, the erasure to your discharge, and the 5 other cases that followed the same pattern. The chain was closing. She could feel it. "When do you go to the committee?" she asked. Warren went quiet for a moment. "I'm presenting a preliminary brief to the committee's staff director tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If the brief is accepted, it triggers a formal suspension of the confirmation hearing pending inquiry. Doyle cannot be confirmed while a formal IG investigation is open." Tomorrow morning. "What's the risk it doesn't get accepted?" Calloway asked. "Low," Warren said. "With what we have now, the authenticated archive, the authorization trail, the documentation Miss Voss has provided, the pattern across 7 cases, this is not a marginal presentation. But low risk and no risk are not the same thing, and I want everyone clear on that." "What about the intercepted message?" Nora asked. "The one suggesting Doyle was acting on instruction." "That is," Warren said carefully, "a different conversation. What you described, if it's present in the archived comms from that window, has implications that go significantly beyond the scope of this preliminary inquiry. My technical team is looking, but that thread may need to be handled through a different channel with a different classification level." "Meaning you can't pursue it through the same investigation," she said. "Meaning I pursue what I can pursue and flag the rest appropriately," he said. "That's how this works. I know it's not what you want to hear." It wasn't, but she understood it. "Is there anything you need from me before tomorrow morning?" she asked. "Your written account of the intercepted message," he said. "Time, channel, content, exact wording to the extent you remember it. Tonight, if possible. Calloway knows the secure upload protocol." "I'll have it to you in 2 hours," she said. She spent those 2 hours at the kitchen table in a farmhouse with winter brown fields outside the window, writing in the careful and precise way she'd learned to write operational accounts. Not narrative, not persuasive, just factual and sequential and exact, with dates and times and specific words where she had them, and explicit acknowledgement of uncertainty where she didn't. She wrote it the way she'd written the first log 2 years ago in a forward operating base with a headlamp and shaking hands, with the specific conviction that the truth, rendered clearly enough, could hold its own weight. When she finished, Calloway sent it through the protocol and confirmed receipt. Then they waited. Pause. At 6:17 p.m., a car turned onto the farm road. Calloway was at the window before Nora registered the sound of the engine. He stood to the side of the glass and watched. Diesel was on his feet. "Dark SUV," Calloway said. "Government plates." "Warren?" "Warren drives a sedan," he said. She was on her feet. The envelope was in her jacket pocket. She'd put it there when they arrived and hadn't taken it out since. An old instinct, the kind of habit that lives in the body rather than the mind. The SUV came to a stop in the driveway. 2 figures got out. Both men, both in civilian clothing, both moving with the particular purposefulness of people who are accustomed to arriving at places without prior invitation. Calloway's hand went to his phone. He dialed Warren. The call went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Same result. "That's not good," she said. "No," he said. The knock on the door when it came was 3 knocks, evenly spaced, professional, not aggressive. She and Calloway looked at each other across the kitchen. "They followed us," she said. "Or they found the property through the records," he said. "My colleague's name is on the deed." She was already thinking through the options with the cold clarity of a situation where the time available for deliberation was measured in seconds. The documentation in her pocket could not be taken from her without her consent unless they had a lawful reason, and the question of whether they had a lawful reason was the question she needed answered before she opened the door. "Ask for credentials," she said. "Obviously," Calloway said. He opened the door. The man at the front was mid-40s, close-cropped hair, an expression that was professionally neutral in the way of someone who has been trained to present exactly that expression. The second man stood 3 feet back and to the right. Neither of them was wearing a uniform. "Mr. Calloway," the first man said. "My name is Brent Saul. I'm with the Defense Intelligence component of the DoD Inspector General's office." He showed a badge case, open, long enough for Calloway to look. "Why are you here?" Calloway said. "We need to speak with Nora Voss," Saul said. His eyes moved to her. There's been a development in the last 2 hours that changes the timeline of tomorrow's briefing. She kept her face even. What kind of development? The civilian official connected to the authorization trail, Saul said. He contacted our office 40 minutes ago. He's requesting proffer protection in exchange for full cooperation. The room was quiet. He wants to make a deal, Calloway said. He wants to make a deal, Saul confirmed. And the information he's offering to provide goes beyond the scope of what Warren has presented. He looked at Nora steadily. He says he can identify the individual who instructed him to authorize the pull, by name, with documentation. She felt the ground shift under the moment. Not destabilize, I shift. Move into a new configuration. Why does that change the timeline? She asked. Because the individual he's naming is not Doyle, Saul said. Doyle is one step in a longer chain, and the individual at the top of that chain learned about the proffer offer approximately 20 minutes ago. How? Calloway said. Saul looked at him. That's what we're trying to determine. A pause. But in the last 30 minutes, we've received credible information that an attempt may be made tonight to interfere with the IG process, specifically to access and alter the formal file that Warren submitted this afternoon. Someone's going to tamper with the record, Nora said. Someone is going to try, Saul said. The technical division has already locked the file with dual authentication, but the attempt itself, if it happens, will be logged, and it will identify who tried. She understood what he wasn't saying. They needed her to be in a secure location, not because she was in physical danger, but because she was the corroborating human element of a documented chain, and if someone was going to challenge the chain's integrity, the last thing they needed was any question about where she was and whether she'd been accessed. You want me to come with you, she said. I want to offer you that option, Saul said. You're not required. I'll come, she said. She looked at Calloway. I'm coming too, Calloway said. Saul glanced at the second man behind him, who gave a small nod. All right, Saul said. She was already picking up her jacket. Inside the kitchen, behind her, the farmhouse was quiet and ordinary. The table where she'd written 2 hours of documentation. The secondary phone, still on the table. Diesel, who had remained on his feet throughout the entire exchange, now moved to stand beside her with the attentive stillness of something that had already made its own assessment and reached its own conclusion. They walked out to the SUV in the cold air of late afternoon, the fields around them flat and open and going dark at the edges as the light dropped. She was in the back seat, Diesel pressed warm against her left side, when her phone vibrated. A text. Warren's number. She opened it. Don't get in that car. She read it. Read it again. The SUV's doors were already closed. The engine was already running. Brent Saul was in the front passenger seat, and the second man was behind the wheel, and the farm road was ahead of them, and the text was 3 words, and the car was moving. She looked at Calloway. He hadn't seen his phone yet. She put her hand on his arm. She squeezed Calloway's arm once, hard, and showed him the screen. He read it. His expression didn't change, not because he wasn't processing it, but because he'd trained his face not to report before his mind was ready. She watched him look at the back of Saul's head, then at the driver, then at the road ahead, then at her. 3 seconds. Then he slid his hand into his jacket pocket and came out with the secondary phone. Not his regular phone, the secondary one, the one Warren didn't have the number for. He kept it below the window line and typed with his thumb while keeping his posture relaxed and his gaze level. She kept her own phone visible, screen down on her thigh. Diesel was pressed against her side, warm and very still, and she could feel him reading the tension in the car the way dogs read things that don't have language yet. The road outside was darkening. The farm had been behind them for 4 minutes, and the highway interchange was visible ahead. 2 options, 2 directions, and she needed to know before they got there which way this car was going to turn. Calloway put the secondary phone away. Where exactly are we going? He asked. His voice was easy, the voice of someone asking a reasonable logistical question. Harlow City Field Office, Saul said, without turning around. It's about 30 minutes from here. Which field office? A half-second pause. DODIG Satellite Office, near the Federal Building. The Federal Building, the same 3-block radius where Warren's trace had put the morning phone call, She filed that without moving. "I'd like to call Warren," she said. "Warren is currently in a secure briefing," Saul said. "He won't have his phone." "I'll leave a message," she said. Another pause, slightly longer. "Go ahead." She dialed. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, which was what she'd expected. She kept her voice entirely neutral. "Warren, it's Nora Voss. I'm en route to the Harlow City DODIG satellite office with Brent Saul and one other. ETA approximately 25 minutes from now." She checked her watch and gave the exact time. "Wanted to make sure you had our location." She ended the call. In the front seat, Saul's posture had not changed, but in the mirror, she'd been watching the mirror, the driver's eyes moved to him for exactly 1 second. That was enough. She looked down at her phone, opened her messages, found the thread with the advocacy office contact she'd corresponded with 7 months ago, the one who'd apologized and said they couldn't help. She typed fast and low. "I'm in a vehicle with 2 men claiming DODIG credentials. Brent Saul, Harlow City Satellite Office. If you don't hear from me in 45 minutes, send this to Warren at IG." She attached the voicemail screenshot, the original text from Warren, and her current GPS location, which she screenshotted before sending. She sent it. "Put the phone away." She was not panicking. She was being precise about the available information. Warren's text said, "Don't get in the car," but Warren's text had also arrived 30 seconds after she was already in it, which meant either Warren had learned something in those 30 seconds or Warren's message had been delayed. Either way, she was in the car, and the car was moving, and the most dangerous thing she could do was nothing. Calloway, beside her, was doing his own version of the same calculation. She could feel it in the stillness of him, the particular stillness of someone who is waiting for the right moment rather than the comfortable one. The highway interchange came up. The car turned east, away from the federal building, away from downtown Harlow City. She felt Calloway register it, his left hand on his thigh, closed slightly. "The satellite office is north," she said, conversationally, like she was helping with directions. "We're taking a different route," Saul said, "avoiding construction." She looked out the window. The road they were on was taking them toward the eastern industrial margin of the city. Warehouses, logistics facilities, the kind of infrastructure that operates on shift schedules and is largely empty after dark. "I'd like to know where we're actually going," she said, and this time she didn't bother with the conversational tone. Saul turned around for the first time. His face in the dim light of the car was composed in a way that told her it had been composed deliberately. "Miss Voss," he said, "there are people who would very much prefer that the briefing tomorrow not happen. I am not one of those people, but the location I've been authorized to bring you to is not the satellite office." "Then what is it?" Calloway said, and his voice was flat. "A secure facility where the individual seeking proffer protection is currently located," Saul said. "He requested a face-to-face meeting with you specifically, tonight, before he finalizes his cooperation agreement." "Why me specifically?" "Because the statement he's prepared names an event that only you can corroborate," Saul said, "and he won't sign the cooperation agreement until you've heard it." She looked at Calloway. He looked back at her. The situation had 3 possible shapes. This was exactly what Saul said it was, in which case the irregular routing and the blocked phone calls were explainable by operational security. This was a controlled operation to get her into a location where the documentation in her pocket could be accessed under the appearance of legal process. Or this was something in between, where Saul himself was a legitimate actor operating inside a compromised structure, which made him simultaneously useful and dangerous. "The person seeking proffer protection," she said. "Is it the civilian appointee?" Saul looked at her for a moment. "Yes. And he won't cooperate without talking to me first." "That's correct." "And Warren doesn't know about this meeting," she said, "because Warren's calls are going to voicemail." Something shifted in Saul's expression. Not guilt, exactly, but the look of someone who is aware of an inconsistency and has been hoping not to be asked about it directly. "Warren's office is aware of the proffer negotiation," he said carefully. "The specific operational details of tonight's meeting were coordinated through a separate channel. A channel Warren isn't on," she said. "A channel with different clearance requirements," Saul said. She sat back. The car was still moving. She had 22 minutes of GPS data broadcasting to her advocacy contact. She had diesel. She had the documentation in her pocket, which nobody in this car had touched or asked about. And she had the specific fact that Saul had, in the last 4 minutes, answered every question she'd asked. Not completely, not without hedging, but without lying. She was fairly certain of that last part, which didn't resolve anything but narrowed the field of what she was dealing with. "All right," she said. "Let's go talk to him." The facility was a nondescript building that had been retrofitted at some point from a commercial property into something with better locks and no visible signage. There were 2 vehicles already in the lot. Interior lights on the ground floor. A man at the entrance who checked Saul's credentials without speaking and opened the door without being asked. She noted the absence of a camera at the entrance. There was one at the corner of the building, but it was angled toward the lot, not the door. If someone was trying to document arrivals, they were doing it badly. If someone was trying to ensure arrivals weren't documented, they were doing it well. She noted that. Inside, a corridor, fluorescent light, the smell of a building that was used occasionally rather than consistently. 3 doors. Saul took them to the second one and knocked twice before opening it. The man inside was seated at a plain table, and he looked like a man who had not slept in 2 days and had recently made a decision that he understood the full weight of. Mid-60s, soft around the middle, wearing civilian clothes that seemed slightly wrong on him, like a costume he hadn't quite settled into. His hands on the table were still, but the stillness was effortful. His name was Raymond Leck, and she knew it now because Saul had given it to her in the corridor. Raymond Leck, DOD Policy Office, 15 years of institutional survival through the specific skill of being useful to whoever needed something made to disappear on paper. He looked at her when she came in, and something moved across his face. "You're younger than I thought," he said. "You have something to tell me," she said. She sat down across from him. Calloway stood near the door. Saul remained in the corridor. Leck looked at his hands. "I authorized the pull of the operational communications record," he said. "You already know that." "I do. I want you to know that at the time I was given to understand it was a routine administrative correction," he said, "that a record had been improperly formatted or filed and needed to be withdrawn for recategorization." He stopped. "I understand that this sounds like the kind of thing a person says when they're trying to minimize their responsibility." "It does," she said. "It's also true," he said. "I'm not asking you to believe that absolves me. I'm telling you so you understand why I did what I did without understanding what I was actually doing." He looked up. "I found out what I'd actually done approximately 3 months later, when the pattern of what that record removal had been used for became apparent to me." 3 months later," she said, "and you said nothing." "I said nothing," he agreed. "I was frightened. I want to be precise about that. I understood clearly that I had been used by someone I could not confront, and that if I surfaced what I knew, the person who would be held responsible for the record pull was me, because my name was on the authorization." "You were protecting yourself," she said. Not accusing, just naming. "Yes." He looked at her directly. "I am 58 years older than my conscience, and I have spent a significant portion of my career doing things I would not want examined closely. I'm not a good man. I want to be clear about that too, because I think you've been told a lot of things by people who are trying to manage your perception, and I would like to not do that." She looked at him for a moment. She hadn't expected that, not the self-assessment, not the directness of it. "Who instructed you to authorize the pull?" she asked. He folded his hands on the table. "The instruction came through an intermediary, a staff contact I'd worked with for years. But the instruction itself, I knew where it originated, because the intermediary told me, by way of conveying that I should not ask questions. He said it came from the Haverford office." Calloway, at the door, made a sound that was not quite a word. She looked at Leck. "Say that name again." "The Haverford office," Leck said. "Philip Haverford. He is currently—" "I know who he is," she said. Philip Haverford was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. He had been in that position for 6 years. He sat on 2 advisory committees. He had testified before Congress 4 times. His name appeared in defense policy coverage with the adjective respected attached to it, the way certain people accumulate adjectives they don't deserve through longevity and the absence of visible scandal. He's not in any of the documentation, she said. His name doesn't appear anywhere. No, Lex said. It wouldn't. Haverford doesn't put his name on things. He operates through proximity, through people who owe him things, or people he's made careful arrangements with. The intermediary I mentioned, Doyle himself, to some extent. He paused. Haverford had a specific interest in that operational route being used. What kind of interest? She asked, and this was the question she'd been waiting to ask for 2 years, and she kept her voice entirely steady when she did. Leck looked at the table. There was a contract, he said, a private logistics contract for a reconstruction program in that region. The contracting company had a financial relationship with Haverford, not directly, not traceable in a simple search, but real. The route your unit was ordered to take passed through a corridor that the contracting company was negotiating access rights for. She sat very still. If the route had been used, Lex said, and if there had been an engagement in that corridor, the military presence would have created justification for extended security operations in that zone, which would have facilitated the contract negotiation. He stopped. I'm not saying Haverford ordered an ambush. I don't know that. What I know is that the route order served a financial interest that he had, and that when a sergeant refused the route order and documented her refusal, Haverford had both motive and capacity to make that documentation disappear. The room was very quiet. She thought about a valley in Kandahar, about 10 people who came back because she'd made a calculation that turned out to be correct, about what it meant that the order they'd been following hadn't been a tactical decision at all. It had been, at least in part, an instrument of someone else's financial arrangement. She'd known the route was wrong. She hadn't known why it had been ordered. Now she did. This is what you're willing to put in the cooperation agreement, she said. Everything I've just told you, Lex said, documented to the extent I can document it. I can provide the name of the intermediary. I can provide records of communications between myself and that intermediary that, while not explicit, establish the relationship. And I can provide... He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. A copy of an internal memo that was sent to me in 2017 from the Haverford office, requesting that I identify and flag any further IG inquiries related to your unit's operational record from 2015 to 2018, so that they could be, and I'm quoting, appropriately redirected before escalation. He slid the document across the table. She picked it up, unfolded it, read it. It was dated 14 months after her discharge. Haverford's office header. The language was bureaucratic and deniable in the way that bureaucratic language is designed to be, but its meaning was not ambiguous to someone who knew what to look for. Why are you doing this now? She asked. Because Doyle's promotion changes my exposure, Lex said. He moves up. He has access to more of the infrastructure that Haverford uses to manage these things. And my name is in files that I would prefer not to be in. I made a calculation. He looked at her without flinching. I am aware that this is not a noble reason. No, she said, it isn't. But it means everything I'm giving you is real, he said. I'm not doing this out of conscience. I'm doing this because the alternative is worse for me, which makes my testimony more reliable than you might expect, not less. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she folded the memo, put it in her pocket next to the envelope, and stood up. Then let's stop wasting time, she said. What followed was 3 hours of the most methodical documentation she had ever participated in. A lawyer arrived for Leck at some point. A small, precise woman who read everything before letting Leck sign anything and asked 3 questions that were better than anything else asked in the room that night. Warren arrived at 10:40 p.m., alive and reachable and deeply unhappy about the routing of the evening, which he expressed in 4 clipped sentences before sitting down and getting to work. Saul remained on the perimeter, coordinating things she didn't have full visibility into, and she made a deliberate decision to let that be. She couldn't control everything in the room, and the things she could control were the things that mattered. Her own formal statement was amended twice during the session. Once when Leck's account provided specific context that allowed her to be more precise about the intercepted message from 2016, and once when Warren's technical contact called in with confirmation that the comms archive from that operational window contained in the backup records a series of encrypted transmissions between Doyle's channel and a DoD policy office channel in the 72 hours prior to the root order. Not decoded yet. Being decoded. How long for the decryption? Warren asked, on speakerphone with his technical contact. 48 to 72 hours on the encrypted content, the contact said. The metadata is already available. Channel identifiers, timestamps, traffic volume. That alone establishes a communication pattern. What does the pattern show? Warren asked. 11 exchanges in 72 hours between Doyle's command channel and an office-level sender in DoD policy. Unusually high frequency for that communication pair. The last exchange was logged 14 hours before the route order was issued. She didn't look at anyone in the room when she heard that. She looked at the wall because she needed to look at something neutral while she processed the specific sensation of a truth she had been carrying for 2 years, finding external confirmation. It was not relief exactly. It was something older and more complicated than relief. Warren ended the call. He looked at her. The decrypted content, when we have it, may establish direct coordination, he said. In the meantime, the metadata combined with Lex's testimony and your intercepted message account constitutes, he chose his next word carefully, substantial predicate. For what? She asked. For escalation to a congressional notification level, he said, which removes the hearing suspension from my office's authority and places it within the committee's jurisdiction. At that level, Haverford's office does not have the access to redirect or suppress the process. When do you make that notification? Warren looked at his watch. I filed the escalation report at 8 a.m. The committee staff director will have it before 9. Doyle's confirmation hearing is placed in mandatory suspension within the hour. She did the calculation. 8 a.m. was 9 hours and 14 minutes away. And Haverford? She asked. Haverford is a separate track, Warren said. What we have tonight opens the track. It doesn't close it. He looked at her steadily. That part is going to take longer. I want you to understand that. I understand it, she said. The people who moved quickly tonight to get you into this room. He glanced at Saul, who was in the corner. They were motivated by their own timeline pressures. That's not how this process normally works. And I need you to know that what happens from here is slower and less cinematic than what happened in the last 12 hours. I've been waiting 2 years, she said. I can wait for the rest of it to be done right. Something in Warren's face, the tiredness, the professional distance, shifted slightly. Not into warmth, exactly, into something that was its neighbor. We'll need you available, he said, potentially to testify, possibly before the committee directly, depending on how this develops. I'll be available, she said. She left the facility at 1:30 in the morning with Calloway and Diesel and the documentation still in her pocket and a formally documented chain of custody receipt for the items she'd provided to Warren's office. The receipt was 3 pages long, numbered and initialed, which struck her as the most reassuring thing she'd seen all day. Outside, the cold was clean and the parking lot was quiet. The SUV that had brought them there was gone, replaced by Warren's sedan. She stood in the parking lot for a moment, not going anywhere, just standing. Diesel pressed against her left leg. Above the facility, the sky was winter clear, the kind of clear that only happens when it's been cold enough long enough to push everything else out. You should sleep, Calloway said. I know, she said. She didn't move yet. The memo he gave you, Calloway said, from Haverford's office, flagging IG inquiries related to your unit. What about it? That memo existed because someone in Haverford's office was monitoring for exactly this situation, he said, which means they've been monitoring for it continuously, which means when the preliminary inquiry opened 3 months ago, they knew, she said. Yes, that's how the phone calls happened. That's how the license flag happened. She looked at him. Haverford's office has been watching for anyone picking up that thread since 2017. I tripped the wire when I contacted the advocacy office. 7 months ago, Calloway said. 7 months ago, she confirmed. He looked at her. That means they've had 7 months to build a response. And what they did with 7 months was send you text messages and try to get you into a car. She understood what he meant. They'd had 7 months to construct something substantial, and what they'd managed was intimidation, which meant either they were overconfident or they were constrained. Either they believed she'd be stopped by the pressure applied to her, or they had less operational freedom than they'd once had. Neither answer was completely comfortable, but the second one was interesting. Someone in Haverford's orbit is not with Haverford, she said slowly. Someone who knew about the proffer offer fast enough to panic, but also knew about the IG inquiry. Someone who has been watching the situation long enough to know that if Doyle gets confirmed, the window closes. Calloway was quiet. The voicemail, she said. This is bigger than you understand, and I'm trying to protect people who have no idea what's coming. That wasn't a threat. That was a warning. From someone inside who is scared of what Haverford does next. If Haverford loses the confirmation hearing, Calloway started, he becomes a liability, she said, to whoever has been covering for him. And people who have been covering for someone have a way of deciding, when the covering stops being safe, that they were never covering for anyone at all. She finally moved toward the car. Warren needs to know, she said, that there's someone in Haverford's orbit who is scared enough to warn strangers by phone, because that person, if they can be found, is a second Lek. And a second Lek, Calloway said, opening the car door, changes everything. Yes, she said, it does. She got in. Diesel settled beside her. The car was warm. Her phone buzzed once. A text from a number she didn't recognize, which she now opened without the hesitation she would have had this morning. It was not a threat. It was a name. A name she didn't know, with a rank she recognized, senior enough to matter, positioned specifically within a DoD advisory committee. And beneath the name, 4 words. He has the recordings. She stared at the screen. Not recordings of her. Not recordings of anything she'd been part of tonight. The phrasing was absolute. The recordings, with the article that implies something specific and known, something the sender expected her to understand the significance of. She didn't understand it yet, but the person sending it clearly believed she would. She looked up at Calloway, who was watching her face. She showed him the screen. He read it again. The color in his face changed in the way of someone who has just recognized something significant and is moving fast to figure out what it means. What recordings? She asked, and Calloway said quietly, I think I know. Tell me, she said. Calloway was quiet for 3 seconds, looking at the name on her phone. Then he said, Colonel Arden Fisk. He was Doyle's intelligence officer from 2014 to 2017. They overlapped with your entire deployment window. I don't know him. You wouldn't, Calloway said. He operated 2 levels above your operational contact. But he would have known you, your unit, your record, your refusal. Everything. He looked up from the phone. 8 months ago, Fisk retired, quietly, no ceremony, no announcement. He'd been passed over for promotion twice and the writing was on the wall, but people in his position usually make noise about going out. He made none. He knew something, she said. He knew something, and he was getting out before whatever he knew became a problem he was too close to, Calloway said. The timing lines up with when Doyle's promotion to 2-star started being circulated internally. When Doyle moves up, Fisk moves into proximity with consequences he didn't want. She looked at the text again. He has the recordings. What recordings? She asked again because Calloway had said he thought he knew, and he hadn't finished saying it. During joint operations in that theater, Calloway said slowly, the intelligence function ran parallel recording protocols on command-level communications. Standard practice for after-action analysis. The recordings were meant to be archived through the intelligence channel, not the operational comms channel. She understood immediately. They wouldn't have been captured in the same backup system. They wouldn't have been in the same backup system, he confirmed. Completely separate archive, which means when someone pulled the operational comms record, the one Warren's technical team found, they didn't touch the intelligence archive, because they may not have known it existed or may not have had authorization to access it. Or they thought they had time to deal with it later, she said. Or that, Calloway said. She thought about 11 exchanges between Doyle's command channel and a DoD policy office in the 72 hours before the root order. Metadata established, content still being decrypted. But if the intelligence recording protocol had captured command-level audio during that same window, Fisk would have had access to those recordings as the intelligence officer, she said. He would have had access, and depending on how thorough he was about his own protection, he may have kept copies, Calloway said. Not to come forward, just to have. The way people keep things when they're in environments where leverage is the currency. He kept them as insurance, she said, and now he's using them as a way out. He's sending you his name, Calloway said, through an anonymous text at 1:30 in the morning, the same night Leck agreed to cooperate. He's watching this situation move and he's making a calculation about which side of it he wants to be on. She called Warren. It rang twice. Warren picked up, which meant he hadn't slept yet either, and probably wasn't going to. Arden Fisk, she said, former Colonel, Doyle's intelligence officer, 2014 to 2017. I have reason to believe he retained copies of command-level audio recordings from the Operational Intelligence Archive, separate from the comms backup your team accessed. I think he's willing to cooperate. A silence on Warren's end that had weight to it. Who gave you this? He asked. Anonymous text, she said, 30 minutes ago. His name and rank and 4 words. He has the recordings. Someone in his orbit, Warren said. Someone who wants the process to move before the window closes, she said. Same logic as Leck. Self-preservation is a more reliable motivator than conscience, and right now self-preservation and the right outcome are pointing in the same direction. She heard Warren exhale. I'll have someone at Fisk's address by morning, he said. Before 8 a.m., she said. Before 8 a.m., he confirmed. She ended the call and looked out the window at the dark road. Calloway was driving steadily, not fast. The city was ahead of them, its light low on the horizon like something that hadn't fully committed to either dark or dawn. Where are we going? She asked. I know a hotel, he said. Cash, no record, you need to sleep. She almost argued. Then she thought about what was coming in the morning and what it would require of her, and she said, all right. Yeah. She slept 4 hours, which was not enough and was also exactly what her body was going to allow. She was awake at 6:15, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed in the dark, running through everything in the sequence she'd learned to use when she needed to hold a complicated situation steady in her mind. Not from the beginning, but from the load-bearing points. The facts that would hold the weight if everything else was challenged. The authenticated comms archive, informal IG custody. The authorization trail, documented and named. Leck's cooperation agreement, signed. The Haverford memo, in Warren's possession with chain of custody. Her own original documentation, receipted. And now, potentially, audio recordings that predated the entire suppression effort. Recordings made before anyone knew there would be anything to suppress. She showered. She put on the same clothes she'd been wearing for 22 hours because she had no others. She ate the protein bar from her jacket pocket that she'd been carrying for 3 days and hadn't needed until now. At 7:48, Warren called. Fisk opened the door when we knocked, he said. He had a bag already packed. He was expecting you, she said. He was expecting someone, Warren said. He turned over 3 external drives. His lawyer is reviewing the cooperation parameters now, but preliminary assessment from my technical team is that the drives contain approximately 19 hours of archived command-level audio from the relevant operational period. He paused. Including the 72 hours prior to the root order. She closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second was all she allowed herself. Is it usable? She asked. My technical director says the recording quality is consistent with the protocol specifications, authenticated metadata. Chain of custody is the question we'll need to work through given that Fisk retained these outside of official channels, but the content itself, if it shows what we expect it to show, is going to be very difficult to argue around. And the 8 a.m. filing, she said. Already submitted, Warren said, 12 minutes ago. Hearing suspension is being processed now. Doyle's confirmation is on hold pending formal IG investigation, effective immediately. She stood up from the bed. The room was small and ordinary, and the window showed a parking lot, and beyond it, a gray early morning sky. Haverford, she said. Haverford is going to know about the suspension within the hour, Warren said. That's unavoidable at his level. What he does with that knowledge is a question, and the answer to that question will tell us something. He'll try to move the archive, she said. The intelligence recordings, if he learns Fisk gave them up, He'll look for any procedural angle to challenge custody. We anticipated that, Warren said. The drives are in a classified evidence facility as of 40 minutes ago. The access log requires committee-level authorization to modify. He can challenge, but the challenge process itself becomes part of the record. She thought about what Warren had said the night before, slower and less cinematic. He'd been right about that. What was happening now was not a single dramatic moment. It was the accumulation of procedural weight, document by document, authenticated chain by authenticated chain, until the structure Haverford had built over years had too much sitting on top of it to stay standing. It wasn't fast. It wasn't clean. It was the way real things come apart, under pressure that doesn't stop. "What do you need from me today?" she asked. "For now, nothing," Warren said, and she could hear the particular tiredness of someone who has been working through the night and has found, on the other side, something that looks like forward progress. "Stay available. I'll call you when the committee staff director confirms receipt." He ended the call. She sat back down on the bed. Diesel, who had slept on the floor beside her with his usual absolute commitment, put his chin on her knee. She put her hand on his head. "Okay," she said, to herself as much as to him. "Okay." Team. The confirmation of hearing suspension came at 9:23 a.m. Warren texted it to her in 4 words. "Suspension confirmed. Inquiry formal." Then, 30 seconds later, a second text. Haverford's office called the committee. Attempting procedural challenge. Committee declined to receive. She read both texts twice and then set the phone face down on the hotel room table and sat quietly for a moment with the specific feeling of something that has been pushed against a wall for a very long time and has finally, not dramatically, not with music, stopped being pushed. Calloway knocked on the adjoining door. She opened it. "You saw," he said. "Yes." He looked at her face. "How are you doing?" It was a simple question, and she didn't have a simple answer. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me when I've slept more than 4 hours." He almost smiled. Not quite. "There's coffee downstairs." "Give me 5 minutes," she said. She used the 5 minutes to call the advocacy office contact she'd texted in the SUV. The woman picked up immediately. "I saw the message," the woman said. "I was watching. Are you safe?" "I'm safe," Nora said. "The hearing suspension is formal. I wanted you to know since you've been in this with me for 7 months. "Not 7 months, the woman said. "I had to stop. I'm sorry for that." "I know," Nora said. "I know why you stopped." She paused. "It's moving now. Whatever you can do to support other people who are still in the process, the other names in the pattern, it would matter." A pause on the other end. "I'll do that," the woman said. "I mean it." "I know you do," Nora said. She meant it too. The weeks that followed were exactly what Warren had promised. Slower, procedurally dense, unglamorous in the way that real accountability is almost always unglamorous. She was deposed twice before a Senate committee staff investigator. She provided supplemental documentation on 3 separate occasions. She spent 4 hours in a room answering questions from 2 attorneys whose job was to find inconsistencies in her account and who did not find them, which she knew was not the end of anything, but was the end of one particular angle of attack. The audio recordings from Fisk's drives were authenticated over 11 days by a technical team with credentials that would survive challenge. What they contained, once the relevant sections were identified and transcribed, was precisely what the metadata had suggested: a pattern of communication between Doyle's command channel and a DoD policy office channel in the 72 hours prior to the route order. And within that communication, specific language that had no tactical military content. Language about access corridors and contract windows, and the word expedited used in a context that had nothing to do with military expedience. It wasn't a confession. Nothing in these things was ever a confession, but it was a conversation between a military commander and a political appointee about a logistical arrangement, conducted in the hours before an order was issued that served that arrangement, and it was recorded and authenticated and in the formal custody of a Senate committee. Philip Haverford placed himself on medical leave from his position 17 days after the hearing suspension. The leave was announced internally first, and then, when it became clear the committee was aware of it, publicly. The statement released by his office described it as unrelated to any pending investigations, which was the kind of statement that generates more coverage than silence would have. She read the statement on her phone while sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store in Harlow City. She'd driven there for the first time in weeks with an actual list and actual money. Temporary reinstatement of her nursing license had come through 5 days earlier, pending full review, and she'd worked 2 shifts at a clinic across town that was willing to have her while Harlow General's credentialing committee conducted its own review of the administrative leave. She read Haverford's statement. She put her phone in her pocket. She went inside and bought coffee and eggs and the particular kind of crackers she'd been eating for dinner for too many nights to count. And this time she put them back on the shelf and bought something that required actual cooking. It felt like a small thing. It was not a small thing. The full formal hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee was set for a Thursday morning in late winter, 41 days after the suspension. She was notified that she would be called to testify and that her testimony would be on the public record. She'd never testified before a Senate committee. She thought about it the night before in the way she'd learned to think about things that were large and uncertain. Practically, sequentially, without catastrophizing. What she knew, what she could say, what she would not allow to be taken from her by the framing of the questions. She knew how to hold a line. She'd been holding one for 2 years. She wore her nursing scrubs to the hearing, not as a statement exactly, or maybe as one, but not a performed one. She'd considered wearing something else, and had looked in her closet and thought about who she was and what she was doing and what she wanted the people in that room to see when she walked in. A nurse who had been a soldier, a person who had done what was right at significant cost, and had continued doing what was right in different rooms with different tools. The scrubs were honest. She put them on. The committee room was larger than she'd expected. The ceiling was high, and the seats were full, and there were cameras in places she tried not to look at directly. She sat at the witness table with a glass of water and her notes on a single index card that she didn't end up needing. The committee chairman introduced her by name, by rank, by unit designation. He read the dates of her service. He read the citation numbers of her medals and the actions they recognized, and the name of the operation in 2016. He read her discharge classification. Then he read the IG finding that the discharge classification had been issued on the basis of a formal insubordination charge that was itself based on a falsified operational record, and that the charge was therefore without foundation, and that the discharge was being reclassified. He read all of this into the public record in the flat, measured voice of a man who has read many things into many records, and the words were ordinary words. And they were also the words she had been waiting 2 years to hear spoken aloud in a room where they couldn't be taken back. She didn't cry. She thought she might, and she didn't. What she felt was something she couldn't name in the moment. A settling, a recalibration, the physical sensation of weight she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped registering it, beginning, slowly, to distribute differently. Then she was asked if she would like to make a statement before questions. She looked at the index card. She put it face down. "I want to be precise about what happened," she said, and her voice was steady, "because precision is how this gets used for something beyond just my case." She looked at the committee members, one face at a time, briefly. "What I did in 2016 was refuse an order that I believed would result in the deaths of the people in my care. I was right about that. 10 people came home because I made that call. I've lived with the consequences of making it for 2 years, and I would make it again." She paused. "What I want this record to show is not that I was exceptional. I was a trained medical professional doing what trained medical professionals do, assessing a situation, identifying the risk, acting on the information available. The system that followed should have protected that. Instead, it was used to erase it. And that was not a failure of one general or one policy official. It was a failure of every mechanism that should have caught what they were doing and didn't." She looked down at the table for one moment, then back up. "The people who helped me get to this room, the investigator who opened the inquiry, the former officer who recognized my name on a medal in a pawn shop, the people who came forward at personal risk, they are the system working the way it's supposed to work. What I'm asking for, and what the other people whose names are in that IG file are asking for, is that the system worked that way consistently, not for the exceptional cases, for all of them. She stopped. The room was quiet in the particular way of rooms where something has just been said that doesn't need applause or commentary to register. The chairman thanked her. Questions followed. She answered them clearly and completely and without embellishment for 1 hour and 40 minutes. The formal outcomes came in sequence over the following weeks, and they came in the way formal outcomes come, without drama, without a single clear moment, but with the accumulated weight of decisions made in rooms she wasn't in by people working from the record she'd helped build. General Marcus Doyle was relieved of his duties pending the formal investigation. The relief was not announced publicly at first. It was an administrative action, routed through the appropriate channels. But within 72 hours it was in the defense press, attributed to sources familiar with the situation, which was the way these things always surfaced. She read the first report on her phone while sitting in the break room at the clinic, between patients, with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. Raymond Leck's cooperation agreement was formalized, and the terms included full cooperation with the investigation into Haverford's office. His testimony, combined with Fisk's recordings and the authenticated comms archive, formed the evidentiary core of a referral to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation into the abuse of authority and the falsification of military records. The referral was made public by the committee chairman in a statement that named Haverford directly. Philip Haverford did not return from medical leave. His office released a statement indicating his resignation, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. The statement was 3 sentences long and was reported alongside the committee chairman's statement in every major defense policy outlet. The contrast was not subtle. The 5 other names from the IG's pattern, the other personnel whose records had been manipulated, whose appeals had disappeared, were each contacted by Warren's office and offered formal record correction and reinstatement of benefits where applicable. 2 of them she spoke with directly, on calls that were not easy and were not meant to be easy. The damage done to those people was real and specific, and a formal record correction didn't undo it. She didn't tell them it did. She told them what she knew, that the finding was on the official record now, that no one could make it not have happened, and that sometimes the best available outcome is not enough and is still worth having. One of them said, "I spent 3 years thinking I was wrong." "I know," she said. "I wasn't wrong." "No," she said. "You weren't." Her nursing license was fully reinstated without notation 43 days after the hearing suspension. The administrative flag was removed from the state board record entirely, not just cleared, removed, as if the procedure that had placed it had been formally voided. She received a letter from the licensing board that was 4 paragraphs long and used the phrase, "We regret the disruption," twice, which she understood was the institutional equivalent of an apology from something that could not fully make itself apologize. She returned to Harlow General on a Monday morning in early spring. The credentialing committee had completed its review 10 days earlier. Lynette Marsh had called personally, not to apologize, though there was something in her voice that occupied the territory adjacent to it, to inform her that the administrative leave was rescinded and her position was being restored. Nora had said thank you and written down the start date and ended the call and sat with the complexity of it for a while because she was human and she'd been hurt by what had happened, and the restoration of her job didn't make that unhappen. But she went back. She went back because she was a nurse and the work was the work, and she was good at it, and because at 31 years old she had already spent enough of her life organized around the people who had diminished her. The work was hers. She was going to keep it. The morning she returned, the nursing station was busy in the ordinary way of a Tuesday morning. The board full, the night staff finishing handoffs, someone's phone ringing at the far end of the corridor. She clocked in. She picked up her patient assignments. She checked the board the way she'd learned to check it, looking for what the board wasn't saying. Deborah Falk was at the nursing station, the spreadsheet open on the screen beside her, a pen behind her ear and a coffee cup that was definitely not her first of the morning. She looked up when Nora came in. "Room 9's potassium came back low," Deborah said. "Resident hasn't been notified." "I'll call," Nora said. She sat down and picked up the phone and did her job. It was not a triumphant moment. It was not meant to be. It was the ordinary beginning of an ordinary shift in a hospital that ran the way hospitals run. And she was in it. And the reason she was in it was that she had told the truth in the place she'd found herself. And the truth had, Slowly, imperfectly, at significant cost, held. James Calloway texted her that afternoon, between patients. "How's the first day?" She typed back, "Like any other. How's Diesel?" Unimpressed by the rain, he says hello. She put the phone in her pocket and went to check on the patient in room 9. Later, weeks later, when things had settled into a shape she could live with, she thought about what had actually happened. Not the facts of it, which she knew precisely, but the meaning of it, what it added up to. She'd spent a long time believing that the system had failed her, that the structures designed to protect people like her had been turned against her, and that this was an aberration, an exception, a corruption of something that normally worked. And that had been true in one sense. But in another sense, what had happened was the system working exactly as it was designed to work. Not by the official design, but by the functional design, the one that operated through access and proximity and the willingness of people in positions of comfort to look away from things that complicated their comfort. What had changed was not the system. The system was what it was and would continue to be what it was. What had changed was the configuration of forces applying pressure to it. A dog who broke formation in a pawn shop, an investigator who opened a preliminary inquiry, a man who'd retired quietly and kept drives as insurance and sent 4 words to a stranger's phone at 1:30 in the morning. A woman at an advocacy office who had been frightened off and then frightened back. A bureaucrat who decided his best exit was through the door he'd helped close. All of them acting from impure motives, all of them imperfect, none of them waiting for the right moment or the right level of certainty or the right assurance that it would work out. She had not been saved by the system finding its conscience. She had been part of a process that forced the system to function, which was a different thing and in some ways a harder thing to hold on to, because it didn't resolve into a clean lesson. It resolved into the ongoing requirement to be someone who does not stop. She had not stopped. She had kept her documentation in a storage unit for 2 years. She had answered questions in that room with Warren. She had gotten into the car even though Warren's text said not to, because the situation required her to be present rather than safe, and she'd known the difference. She thought about all the people whose names were in the IG file who had made the same calculation, who had documented things and filed appeals and tried the proper channels and found the proper channels blocked, and who were still waiting for something to move. They were still waiting. The investigation was open. The investigation was not done. Haverford was gone from his position, but the referral was a referral, not a verdict. These things took time that felt unreasonable to the people absorbing the cost of that time. She knew that. She held it. What she also held, and this was not comfort exactly, but it was real, was the knowledge that the truth she'd written in a log with shaking hands in a forward operating base in 2016, in the dark, alone, uncertain of everything except the necessity of writing it down, that truth had not disappeared. It had waited. It had been found. It had held its weight under examination. She had a new patient in room 12, a 47-year-old woman who had been admitted overnight with a fever of unknown origin and whose morning labs showed something the night resident had documented but hadn't yet acted on. Nora looked at the labs, looked at the chart, went to room 12 and introduced herself and asked the woman how she was feeling and listened to the answer with the specific kind of attention she had spent years learning and years practicing and would spend years more refining. The work was not finished. It was not supposed to be finished. It was supposed to be done, one shift at a time, with the people in front of her, with the information she had, with the judgment she'd earned. She was 31 years old. She had been a soldier and she was a nurse, and she was neither of those things fully because she was also just a person who had found out what she was made of under conditions she had not chosen. Diesel would have been on his mat right now, chin to paws, watching the door. She pulled the chart closer and got to work.